We welcome each of you today to our Monte Vista Grove Homes Convocation, and we thank you for joining us. We'll begin with a scripture reading from the book of James, chapter 2, verses 14 through 18. What does it profit, my brethren, if a man says he has faith, but has not works? Can his faith save him? If a brother or sister is ill-clad and in lack of daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warmed and filled," without giving them the things needed for the body, what does it profit? So faith by itself, if it has not works, is dead. But some will say, "You have faith, and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I, by my works, will show you my faith." Thanks be to God for the letter of James, a servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ. Our prayer today is an intercessory prayer adapted from Nadia Bolz-Weber's Prayers for Sundays. And this was found in the Immigrant Accompaniment Update newsletter in May. Holy God, hear my intercessions for those who are giving birth alone, for those who are grieving without their people, for the beleaguered parents who ran out of creative ideas 2 weeks ago, for those who don't know where this week's grocery money will come from, for everyone who has watched the date of their wedding, or their graduation, or their birthday, or their dissertation defense, or their long hoped for vacation, or their family reunion, or the non-essential medical procedure they hoped would change their life, come and go. For the exhausted and the despairing, I ask that your comfort, your presence, and your peace be felt. And if that's not possible, could you just nudge the right person to reach out and call them? Just that, Lord, just that. Marilee Robertson will introduce her friend Kristi Van Nostran, who is our speaker today. Thank you, Marilee.
It's my pleasure to introduce to you Kristi Van Nostran. Kristi is the Immigrant Accompaniment Organizer. Just so you don't forget, this is what Kristi is. For the San Gabriel and the Riverside Presbyteries. Her position is funded by Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, which is something we support when we give to the One Great Hour of Sharing. Kristi's going to be telling you about what this means, but I just want to say that Kristi is a great gift to those of us struggling with how best to be in solidarity with our immigrant sisters and brothers. Kristi brings a wealth of experience to this position. Nurtured by the First Presbyterian Church of Vancouver, she served as a young adult in the Presbytery of Cascades as a church camp staff person. Studying Spanish as a teenager gave her a love for Central America, which led to her serving as a PCUSA volunteer in Guatemala. On her return to the USA, she served in Oregon and in Texas in outreach programs to Latina women and Latino youth. She then returned to Central America as a PCUSA mission co-worker. And for 7 years, she served with the Joining Hands Ministry in El Salvador. Currently, she is completing a Master of Divinity at Fuller Theological Seminary, and she is pursuing ordination in the Presbyterian Church, USA. Thanks be to God. Kristi, we welcome you and look forward to hearing what you have to share with us.
Thank you so much, Marilee, for that very warm welcome and very thoughtful introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you all this afternoon. This is the second time that I have gotten to be a part of Monte Vista Grove Home's Convocation, although it's been several years now. So I was very excited and honored to have been invited to be with you again. As Marilee mentioned, I am the Immigrant Accompaniment Organizer with San Gabriel and Riverside Presbyteries. And you're probably wondering what immigrant accompaniment means. And you're in the right place. We will get to talk through the various things that encompasses this afternoon. Marilee also mentioned part of my journey to find myself here as the Immigrant Accompaniment Organizer, and this brainchild, this idea for work coming alongside immigrants began as I was serving actually in El Salvador with the Joining Hands ministry, a joint ministry of our Presbyterian Hunger Program and the Presbyterian Mission Agency. I worked with communities and congregations around El Salvador who were fighting for food security and food sovereignty. And many of the communities that we worked alongside were struggling with ways to feed themselves, to keep themselves employed, and to offer opportunities, particularly for their young people, to engage in economic opportunities that would allow them to stay in the communities rather than having to move to larger cities or even seek out opportunities beyond the borders of El Salvador. And I had the opportunity to have many a tearful conversation, particularly with young people, around the situation of social violence that they were experiencing in El Salvador, not unlike many of the other countries in Central America, unfortunately, where gang violence is rampant and organized crime seems to rule the day, and where governments are at a loss as to how to control that situation and keep their populations safe. And so I recall one conversation with a young man who called me late one night in tears, desperate, asking if I knew how he could get to the United States safely. And I just had to sit on the phone and weep with him as he shared all of the reasons why he was ready to risk everything by leaving El Salvador rather than risk everything by staying. And so when I returned to the United States in 2017 and came to Pasadena to work on my Master's of Divinity at Fuller, the seed had kind of already been planted as to how we could come alongside immigrants in our midst, how we were called to accompany them and welcome them, as opposed to the kind of barriers and borders and hateful rhetoric that was really ramping up at that time. And I turned to the scriptures to look for guidance and to kind of discern where I was feeling called to engage in this kind of work. And the first scripture that came to mind was Matthew 25. Whenever you fed the hungry, gave the thirsty something to drink, clothed the naked, visited the prisoner, cared for the sick, whenever you did any of these things with the least of these, my family members, you did them for me. But I turned also to the Hebrew scriptures, and in particular, this passage from Deuteronomy really stood out to me as a powerful witness and testimony to the way that we are called to be with immigrants in our midst. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 18 and 19, and this is the Common English Bible version, reads, God enacts justice for orphans and widows, and God loves immigrants, giving them food and clothing. That means you must also love immigrants because you were immigrants in Egypt. And it really got me thinking, what does this mean for our communities? What does this mean for our churches? What does this mean for the ministries that we engage in around homelessness, around food programs? What does this look like in light of the plight of our immigrant siblings? And as I learned a little bit more about the greater LA area and connected in with more congregations and church leaders throughout our presbyteries, we had the idea to start something, but we didn't quite know what. And the opportunity to travel to the border with some representatives of the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, that opportunity arose, and I was able to join them for a weekend at the Tijuana-San Diego border in February of 2019. And the conversation deepened there as we saw firsthand what was happening on the other side of the border, as the metering had begun and they were limiting the number of people who could come to the point of entry at any given time during the day. And they were metering how many people they would let through, those who had come exercising their legal right to request asylum, declaring that they were fleeing persecution in their homelands and seeking refuge in the United States, which is a legal action to take. And yet they were being told that only a certain number of people could come in each day, and they were being sent back to wait without the conditions to really live, survive, let alone comfortably. And so as that conversation deepened around what is it that we can be doing to walk with our immigrant siblings, the idea arose that we recognize that many of our churches around many of our presbyteries in Southern California were already engaging in different ministries with immigrants. Some had already been deep in Bible study, seeking out that same guidance and discernment from the scriptures about what it is we're called to do. Some were already welcoming people into their communities and coming around coming around them, coming alongside them to support them with the needs that they had. Some were already making visits to the Adelanto detention facility in the high desert in Adelanto, California, visiting immigrants who are detained at that facility, some for months or years at a time, awaiting their day in court. So many different ministries were already in place. We learned of a lot of people who were already engaging in really good works to support immigrants and refugees. But what was missing was someone to kind of weave all the stories together, or someone who could bring all the parties to the table and kind of coordinate efforts and help resource the people who were engaged in these ministries. And so we created this position of Immigrant Accompaniment Organizer. And I was, sitting with fingers and toes crossed, just hoping that they would allow me to apply for this position, as I was really thrilled to be a part of kind of crafting the idea, but felt like God had really placed on my heart this desire to engage with immigrants in this way. And part of that came from the experience that I was already living at home when in November of 2018, I welcomed a young asylum seeker from Honduras into my 1-bedroom graduate school apartment, along with my 2 40-pound dog daughters. And Marisol joined our little family for what was going to be a temporary stay, a month, maybe 2, until she could find something more permanent, a host or a host family that could offer her a space to stay while she awaited her day in court seeking asylum. And what began in November of 2018 continues to this day. We just celebrated our 2-year anniversary together in November. And so she is still a part of my little family, my little household. And together we have learned much about what it looks like to come alongside asylum seekers and refugees. We've learned a lot about what it looks like to be in a host family situation. We've learned a lot about what it is to wait on an immigration system that is very slow and very overburdened and very inefficient. And we've learned a lot about one another, and we have kind of learned to get along. And sometimes it feels like the smiles in 3 of these pictures, and sometimes I feel like, what am I doing? Like the confused look that I have in the bottom corner. But the good news is that we've gotten through it together, and she will have her day in court in June of 2021. So you can imagine arriving in a new city, not knowing anyone, not having any family, and being told that your court hearing was still nearly 3 years off. What was she going to do for 3 years in LA with no support system? So this was in the back of my mind. I had already welcomed Marisol into my home when we started having these conversations conversations around creating a position. And I knew that we would have to encourage churches and church members to engage in hosting and sponsoring asylum seekers, because housing is one of the key needs. But housing is not the only need. Also, there is a great need of just community, just coming alongside, listening, helping with things like transportation, helping with things like providing translation, or helping get connected with English classes. Also finding used home goods or used or new clothing that could be provided. And key have been the grocery gift cards that go out to the asylum seekers that are being hosted in our communities, so that they have the agency to do some shopping for themselves, that they can choose the things that they want to eat sometimes, and prepare for themselves, and sometimes prepare to share with their host families. And I knew that it had to be bigger than just the hosting and support circle, though. There were many who were already engaged in the visitation program at Adelanto, as I mentioned. Some of you I know have made visits to Adelanto or are pen pals with people who are detained at Adelanto. And sadly, because of COVID-19, we haven't been able to visit our friends at Adelanto for several months. But there are still many ways that we can engage in advocacy and speaking out for the kind of change that we want to see. And we're very hopeful now with a new administration coming in to see that there will be changes made and kind of an undoing of some of the policy changes that have taken place in the past few years, so that we can promote more just policies and procedures, engaging in loving and welcoming ways with our immigrant neighbors. One of the big changes that we've experienced because of COVID and not being able to visit folks at Adelanto is that thankfully, during this COVID moment, Adelanto has had to draw down its population. They have had to release people in order to comply with CDC guidelines. But unfortunately, they didn't do that before there was an active outbreak of COVID-19 in the facility. So it was not handled in the best way, but thanks be to God, hundreds of people have gotten released from Adelanto in recent months. Some released on bond, some have been released on what's called humanitarian parole. They may have been at high risk for contracting COVID due to underlying health conditions. Some have been released having won asylum, and others with other programs of relief, such as withholding of oh gosh, it's escaping me. Withholding of removal, I'm sorry. But all that to say, the facility that has capacity for nearly 2,000 people, this is one of the largest immigrant detention centers in the country, is now host to a population of about 450. So we've seen literally hundreds of people released in recent months. And with the partnership that our Presbyterian Immigrant Accompaniment Ministry has developed with the Adelanto Visitation Network, together we secured grants, some from Presbyterian Disaster Assistance, others from a local nonprofit foundation called Justice for Immigrants Seeking Asylum out of Claremont. We secured grants in the amount of $27,000 to implement a new model of working with released folks who had been released from the detention center in order to protect the health of volunteers and those being released. We moved away from the volunteer transportation, volunteers hosting overnight in their homes, and we moved to a process of using professional transportation and moving straight to a bus or a train or a plane to get the migrant to the next leg of their journey, which for many was being reunited with family or friends or sponsors somewhere around the country. And so over the last nearly 8 months, our partnership with the Adelanto Visitation Network and the Presbyterian Immigrant Ministry, we have worked with 115 of those individuals to help them get to where they were going. Some have stayed overnight in hotels that we have helped secure for them. All have utilized our transportation services. Some have received backpacks and or pieces of luggage that have been donated by people from our Presbyterian churches. Some have received masks that have been made by people in our Presbyterian churches, and all have been sent off with the many prayers of folks throughout our presbyteries, as we've had the privilege of working with them over these last several months. And another really interesting and exciting development that came out of kind of the necessity of this COVID moment was thinking about utilizing spaces that have been underutilized, or at least during COVID that are not being utilized at their full capacity. We are partnering with First Presbyterian Church San Bernardino to transform an office building that they own that's across the street from their church that used to serve as the presbytery office for the Presbytery of Riverside many years ago, but recently has been sitting vacant and on the market, but not being sold. And so over the last few months, we've been working with the session and members of the congregation to turn this building into a day shelter because we realized it's not zoned appropriately to have it be an overnight shelter, unfortunately. But when we learned that, the session of the church decided that they could convert 2 of their classrooms, their Sunday school classrooms that are not being used for Sunday school right now, into the overnight shelter, so that folks who were released from Adelanto could come, stay overnight the 1 or 2 nights that they needed in order to catch a plane the next day or the following day, and then spend the day over at the day shelter right across the street, which also has a shower in it, which is really key because not many of our congregations or not many of our church buildings are equipped with shower facilities. But so the congregation and the session helped to set up received donations. You can see in the photo here, the beds are set up with linens, and they have nice, each has a lamp and a bedside table, and they've got a nice rug there laid out. And in the top corner, there are 3 quilts that were made by quilters in the congregation to go on each one of those 3 beds, as a way to kind of offer welcome, to help them feel at home, even though they're maybe just staying for 1 or 2 nights. And unfortunately, we have still, we're still working out some of the kinks and some of the logistics about staffing and other pieces. And so we haven't yet hosted anyone overnight in this space, although for all intents and purposes, it is ready to go. But what we have done and what we are planning to do is that there is another released immigrant shelter down the way at an Episcopal church in San Bernardino that's walking distance from First Presbyterian Church. And they are already hosting 8 or 10 individuals at that church facility, but in a more kind of medium term capacity. But they don't have a shower on site. So in the meantime, as we try and figure out how to get our shelter up and running, at very least, we are figuring out how to get the gas turned on and the heat turned up so that folks from the St. John's Episcopal shelter can come a couple times a week and get a shower, a warm shower, at the First Presbyterian Church House of Welcome space that's across the street. So there are so many things going on around our presbyteries with regard to immigrant accompaniment, the hosting, the support circles, the visitation or the accompaniment of detained immigrants at Adelanto, advocacy for just policies, and the prayers that go out to all of our immigrant siblings who are either living independently or are hosted in our communities. And it's really a joy and a blessing for me to get to coordinate these efforts and to work with amazing volunteers from our churches and beyond, as we seek to offer welcome and hope to the least of these family members of Jesus, the immigrants that God calls us to love because we were once immigrants. At this time, I want to open it up for questions, and would just welcome your questions or comments.
Oh, we have one in the chat already. What do the immigrants do during the day?
That's a great question. The idea, again, we haven't yet had this full experience, but in our imagination, in our plan, they would be able to rest there. They would be able to watch TV there. They'd be able to repack their clothes and personal items. Many of them are just released with all of their belongings in a plastic bag. So that's not very easy to travel with, nor is it very dignified to travel with. So we try and offer, like I said, backpacks and small suitcases. So they're able to kind of repack and get things reorganized. They can, they'll be able to take meals there during the day. But what we've seen is that usually there's not very much layover time. There's not, usually the taxi is there bright and early that following day to get them to the airport or to the bus station or train station so that they're off on their next leg of their journey. As you can imagine, they are very eager to be reunited with family and friends, and those expecting them are very eager to receive them. So the shorter the time that they have at that day shelter, the better, just because that means that they're moving on to their next destination.
Some Christians see the immigration question differently than you do. How have you been able to deal with that?
Scripture is our friend on this one, and I think there are some very undeniable passages in both the Hebrew scriptures and in the Newer Testament that that speak directly to the plight of immigrants and how we are called to engage with them. Also, the working with asylum seekers is also kind of unique because being a part of an asylum process is a legal process. So to speak of illegal immigrants with regard to asylum seekers is incorrect. To speak of illegal immigrants for any immigrant is incorrect, I would put out, but specifically for asylum seekers, because that is very much a legal process. And so we have been able to work with other congregations that are not Presbyterian, even a number of evangelical congregations that tend to lean a little bit more conservative, even on the immigration issue. But because it's clear that we're working with a population that is in a legal process, they've done it right, they've come legally. I mean, all of those things that you hear that kind of make your skin crawl, they have, in fact, by requesting asylum at the border. So it's still a challenge. And what we try to do is recognize that not everybody is in the same place, and that we want to meet people where they are, just the same way that we meet the immigrants where they are. That we try and come together and find common ground, and so that's what we've tried to do with others who, like you said, don't see this the same way that we do.
Great. Do we have any spoken questions from the audience?
I saw Virginia's hand. Virginia Donahue had raised her hand.
Virginia, you can unmute yourself and jump in.
Yeah, hi. I actually typed it in the chat as well.
Oh.
Wondering, that's okay, if you had read the book called American Dirt, and if that is an authentic picture of, I'm sure you've heard some horrendous stories, and I know the author was criticized and there was some controversy, but I thought it was quite effective in helping us understand what happens before crossing the border, let alone after. And I was so happy at the end of that book they were reunited with family. So
yeah,
I
did read.
Yeah,
I did read that book, and it does feel a little bit awkward to say I enjoyed it because the story is quite difficult to read at some point. And I understand the the criticism of a white author writing about the plight of, in this case, a Mexican family, but I did find it to be horribly authentic.
Yeah.
And it's really some of the things that people have experienced are just really atrocious. And seeking refuge, seeking safety is something that I think, that's the least we can offer after the kind of trauma that some of these folks have experienced. But I would recommend the book American Dirt. It is a fiction. It's a novel. It may be a little embellished, and there's some interesting, twists in the story. But I appreciate that you said you enjoyed that they were reunited with family at the end. Unfortunately, not everybody has that that same experience. I was waiting for them because of my experience with the detention center. I was waiting for them to spend time in a detention center. That sounds awful that I was waiting for them to, but that seemed like the next logical step, unfortunately, for so many. But American Dirt, another hard read but good read, is Enrique's Journey. And yeah, those are two good books to really get thrown into what can happen along that journey.
Thank you.
I see
Great.
a question. Go ahead, Lindsay.
There's a couple in the chat. Recently, the plight of African refugees, especially from Cameroon, have been in the news. What is your experience with them?
There are actually, there have been and there are a number of Cameroonians who are detained at Adelanto. And a number of the folks that we have worked with over the last couple of months have been Cameroonian. So we've had a lot of success stories and happy endings with our friends from Cameroon. But some of the other detention centers have really seemed to target them of late. And so we've heard of some kind of mass deportations of Cameroonians. And for those who don't know, Cameroon right now is embroiled in a terrible civil war. I don't know that anyone or that many are talking about it in those terms, but it is effectively kind of one side against the other, and it's very dangerous, particularly for folks who have been involved with the government or who have been involved in organizations that are kind of seen to be outside the realms of appropriate action. I don't know. But it's very, very dangerous. So particularly for our Cameroonian friends, we have been trying to advocate for release so that they can await their cases outside of detention, where they are a little, they're one step more protected from deportation by being outside and waiting with family and friends and carrying on their court case outside of detention. But the Presbyterian Church has been particularly engaged in this because the Cameroonian Presbyterian Church is a global partner. And so we have connections there and have had partnerships for a long time. So you may have seen, if you received some of the updates from our Washington office and the advocacy alerts, there have been some specifically about the plight of our Cameroonian immigrant siblings.
Right. 64% of you have voted in the poll. Thank you. If you have not done so, please do. All right, next questions. Let's see. The book is in the Fireplace Room Library. That's Dave Winters. Is that the American Dirt one?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you for letting us know that. What specifically would you like to see the Biden administration do early into taking office to alleviate the refugee/immigrant dilemma?
Woo! How long do we have? No, I think this is challenging because every immigrant rights organization and every group working with immigrants has a different top priority for what the new administration might do, first or foremost. But I think we can all agree that DACA, the Delayed Action for Childhood Arrivals, that DACA and the Dreamers, that needs to be addressed early on, and there need to be protections put in place, and not only protections, but a path toward citizenship for Dreamers. But Biden has said that he will repeal or he'll undo the executive orders that have to do with immigration, that those are some of the first steps that he would take in the first 100 days. And so we are hopeful that just as the Trump administration took steps early on in the administration to undo and kind of undermine the asylum process, our hope would be that the Biden administration would start to put the pieces back together, and even would seek out reforms where those are needed. But I would say the situation at the border itself really needs to be addressed, because there are still tens of thousands of people, of refugees basically, who have fled God only knows what kinds of situations in their homelands. And this is not only from Central America, but people who've made their way to Tijuana from Africa, East Asia, you name it. There are people from all over the world that are waiting at that border, which has been closed now for many months. And the conditions on the other side are just, it's really challenging, really challenging. So I think the situation at the border needs to be addressed early on in the administration as well.
Great. Are all of those you assist adults, or are there children in the accompaniment program?
That's a good question. The Adelanto facility is strictly an adult detention center, so there aren't any children that we work with in connection with the Adelanto Center, for example. However, some of the families that we have accompanied do have children. So there's a family that was housed at Covenant Presbyterian Church in Los Angeles in an apartment kind of above the office at Covenant, a family of 4 from Honduras that were there for about a year. And they are one of the families that were reunited with a separated child. So about, let's see, in March of 2019, we accompanied 29 families who had previously been separated from children at the border. We accompanied them, many faith leaders and the Al Otro Lado legal services team. Met them at the Calexico-Mexicali border, and we waited with them all day until their paperwork finally got processed so that they could come through and cross over into the United States with the hope of being reunited with the child who had been separated from them and was being held somewhere in the United States. So a number of those families ended up settling in the LA area, and we accompanied 3-4 of them. So in those cases, there were children involved of all ages, but we've mostly been working with adults, young adults, and then families.
Awesome. Can you give us some additional examples of churches that have adopted migrants?
Yeah, one great example that's here in San Gabriel Presbytery is Knox Presbyterian Church is walking with Irma. Irma Martinez is originally from Honduras, and she spent 6 months, more than 6 months in the Adelanto detention facility and was released in August of last year and has spent this last year living with a family from Knox Presbyterian Church. And Knox is one of the churches that was already deeply engaged in Bible study and other book studies, trying to discern how best to get involved with immigrant support. And so when the opportunity came, when we learned that Irma was going to be released from Adelanto, Knox was one of the first churches that I approached with the idea of hosting. And there were 2 families right off the bat, because there had already been this study and kind of this deep conversation about immigration and how we are called to respond. 2 families came forward and said we would be willing to host her, and then it became clear that one of the families, it was going to be really challenging for them with young kids and et cetera. And so it was determined that she would go and stay temporarily again, temporarily with this family. And then it was so seamless. I mean, there were challenges, there were ups and downs, but she integrated so well into the family and into the church, and the church received her with such a warm welcome, and it just worked out so wonderfully that she has stayed there and will continue to stay there. She's just gotten her work permit and Social Security number, which is a part of this legal process of asylum. but she's now waiting. She was supposed to have a court date in early December, but thanks to COVID, that has gotten pushed back to next December. So she has a whole other year to wait. But now with the work permit, she'll hopefully be able to find more consistent and work, and will, start to make a plan for more independence, and perhaps even a plan to move out on her own eventually, which is what we hope for. I should mention that Marisol, the young woman that lives with me, is also in that phase. She has transitioned into being more of a housemate. She pays some rent. We were able to move into a 2-bedroom apartment because of her contributions. She's working now and making a plan to move out on her own. So it's a slower process than we initially thought it would be, but we're seeing good success for the folks who have the support of a community and a congregation behind them. Not only are they able to continue with their court process and successfully make all of their appointments and check-ins and things, but they're able to get the love and support of a community to kind of keep them going and help them do some trauma healing, and to think about what it really means to start a new life in this new place.
Thanks so much, Kristi. We're right about time. I have one more question in the chat, which is, how can you be contacted?
The best way to contact me is via email. My email is presbywelcome@gmail.com. And, or you can seek out Marilee and ask her.
Kristi, thank you so much for your enlightening and sensitive presentation today. I think for so many of us, we hear on the news, we read in the papers about so many displaced people and refuge and asylum seekers. And it's been really wonderful to hear about your work, what you are doing, both personally and professionally, to try to welcome these people who are so desperately in need of a place of refuge. So we're most grateful to you for your being with us today. And we know that in spite of our president's efforts, the immigrants are continuing to come, and in even larger numbers than in previous years. So God bless you and your work. We thank you for your time with us today.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I want to welcome all of you to return next week at this time. And Herman Waitjen, who is New Testament professor, or he's retired now, but he has taught at San Francisco Theological Seminary and also at the Graduate Theological Seminary, Theological Union at Berkeley. And he's going to speak to us on the origin and culmination of the moral order of integration. So it should be a very interesting hour next week at this time. And again, thank you again, Kristi, and God bless you and your work.